So we're talking about a leader's eye view of sales development with Matt, who you all know, brings the energy, of course. But new today is Vlad, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce your last name, so I'll let you introduce yourselves. But I'm Pete Mickartz. I'm the VP of Advisory for Tenbound. Thank you all for coming, by the way. But Vlad, want to give us a quick introduction?
Absolutely. So my last name is Voskresensky. Kind of hard to spell, I know that. But anyway, yeah, so I'm Vlad. It's much easier. I'm co-founder and the CEO of a company called Revenue Grid. And it's very nice to be here. Thanks, awesome. Tenbound, and thanks for having me here.
Of course, thank you. And Matt, you want to introduce yourself one last time for today?
Hello, everybody. Matt Mullen, co-founder and president of Regie.ai. We automate the sequence and cadence generation process, amongst other things. I started selling in 1987, so I've had a front row seat to the infusion of sales technology into our selling process. I hired my first SDRs back in 2002. So I've been doing the SDR motion for a while, and we're excited to have a conversation today.
Awesome. Well, first to tee up, we have two fairly new companies, right? In new markets, kind of paving your own way. And one of the questions that we kind of derived when chatting before this, obviously everything here, was how do you generate interest, right? When you're in a new category, how do you educate potential prospects and customers on what you even do, right? So how do you educate prospective customers, provoke thoughts and interest, and ultimately potentially create opportunities? Vlad, what do you got?
Sure, yeah. So I would say that we're definitely in that new evolving market where I call that sales like educational sales, if you would. We have this unfair competitive advantage that we're coming from another sales automation industry. So we have our very healthy customer base, and those messages would slightly vary depending on who are we talking to. If that's really new account, new phase, and we're early in discovery process, then most of all, the message would be like something like, hey, you probably have heard about revenue intelligence from Gartners of the world, Forrester of the world, opinion leaders. Let us help you to understand what it is in general, right? So if we're farther in discovery process, then we can spice that message with, let me help you to understand what's in it for you. Because then we can really rely, through the discovery process, we may have some hints and things like that. And then if we talk to our lovely customers who are using our technology for slightly different purposes, then obviously the message would be like, hey buddy, how's it going? You like us, you know our technology. Let me show you what else you can get from us as a vendor. So these are pretty much the educational messages. But the bold line underneath of it, it's clearly educational sales. We really have to explain potential value and educate our prospects before we engage with them.
Interesting. So you're almost using third-party research firms to back why you're important, right? Not even necessarily customers, right? Not third-party in that way, but almost research firms as far as revenue intelligence, that aspect.
Absolutely. We would buy the reports and kind of feed our prospects with those reports. All of the known tricks on the market.
Okay. Yep. About Regie AI, what are you guys doing? AI is a hot topic, but
hot topic. If we just back up for a moment, most new organizations are founded because there's a gap somewhere. Like a gap exists in the workflow or the sales process, or somebody from within sees like a better way to solve an existing problem. And that's really the angle we took. We saw some obvious challenges or gaps in the marketplace and really wanted to put forward a tech-first, tech-forward solution to solving that. So that's like number one, why we exist. And the research would say that the number one problem of the modern organization today is content and content strategy. So there's this gap that exists. So what I do is I actually start with the team first, not with the messaging to the customer. So I won't hire anybody that hasn't lived the problem themselves first. Like to have a visceral understanding and a visceral association to the problem in the marketplace that we're solving. Like they were having the problem themselves. They found our product. Now, like they're reborn and they can come take this to the world. And then we know exactly who to target and to target that pain. So a little different than Vlad from the educational perspective, because we know that most sales organizations have this problem. We go right to the persona within the organization that's most likely charged with dealing with this in some way and to start to have that conversation. But again, it's with people that have lived it so they can have that empathy for the problem. And again, we focus on the right person with the problem and then having a very credible solution. So that's how we hit it.
Interesting. So now that we all know how to get hired at Regie AI, we can officially apply there. Okay. No, I'm just kidding. Awesome. So as far as sales development, I know, Matt, you touched on this earlier when you were speaking. whole related to Haka, right? The last 2 years have been tough. It's been incredibly tough, right? Reaching out to prospects for sales development leaders, sales development reps, it's been difficult, right? People out of the office, do you call them on their personal phones? What do we do, right? So what are some of the strategies that you've implemented, either one of you, with your teams to accommodate the new teams, whether it's hiring, onboarding, training, right? Training remote reps, it's not easy, especially when they're young, right? Could be their first job out of school. How do we get these folks onboarded effectively and not scared to make some calls? What do we do?
Super interesting term you say. Last 2 years were tough. I think they were tough, but they were also challenging, and because it's just new. My take is that, and we were talking about that with you, a few weeks ago, that SDR world has completely changed in the last couple of years. There are no SDRs as we know it. It's just dead, effectively dead. Those previous type of SDR work, just because of that net new normal. I would say that what we've done internally, we're kind of realizing that SDR in an old way would not really make us any value unless we try new efforts. Because there are so many SDRing team right now in the market. I call it like frogs croaking orchestra, right? We all get all of those emails in our inboxes. They all start with pretty much the same fake personalization. Like, you know what? I've seen your post on LinkedIn. Congrats with your recent funding, which I read like, hey, I need your money and things like that. So when we try to personalize, we really try to make one step forward. And we've invested a lot of effort in, first of all, acquiring tools which can help us with that personalization. So contacts enrichment, ABM tool, coaching our SDRs. How do they know more about their potential prospects? So even through the sequences, they can still personalize one step forward than all of the other SDRs. And it's actually worked for us very well. So I would say that that's the major focus. Another aspect of it would be a content-based SDRing. So yeah, back to educational sales messaging and everything. We understand that we shouldn't talk about features or product. Nobody cares what features we have. Nobody cares what product we have. We need to understand the problem of potential customers and prospects, but nobody speaks better to them than the content which they can consume themselves and communities they're being part of. So it's another big focus for us is to get to the prospects through the communities, because this is where people trust each other. There could be even small community, not necessarily a super large, big multi-thousand, sales-oriented community. It could be like 100 people meeting virtually to discuss some common problems. And if you can reach out to them in a friendly messaging, they'll trust it more than the traditional outbounding or even content, which is great. So these are, I would say, those things which are working for us, for sure.
Okay.
Who here took a new job during COVID? Yes, look at all these hands. We founded our company during COVID, so there was none of this existing team try to figure out how to exist during COVID. We started a company in COVID, and I think you can't just look at your organization as one. Because there's different roles, and I look at the SDR role differently than I look at the AE and the way we look at engineering and product and other roles. The SDR, because it's typically a more junior role, I believe that there's dense learning opportunity by having some proximity. So that's the one role that we're not doing remote. It's the one role that we wanted close. We want to be able to provide the nurture, the support, and the proximity, and helping to develop and grow that part of our organization. So it limits, number one, who we have in our area. It also limits people that would be willing to come into the office within all of our COVID protocol. But I think what it makes for is a more productive, not only employee, but just in terms of the development. There is no substitute for sitting across the hall from someone, hearing the conversations, and then immediately debriefing. And you don't get sure, you can schedule some time on Zoom, you can review calls, but just hearing what's going on, the energy, the buzz in the office. So we've just made a conscious decision that during this time, in the foreseeable future, we're going to put extra coddling around that specific role within the organization. The other thing is we're not hiring first-time SDRs. That's another decision that we've made, because now is not the time, at least for our organization, being a startup, to start everything from new. So we want to bring in a certain amount, at least 1 year of experience, in terms of understanding the tool stack, understanding what it's like to have to do the work, having some experience with the rejection associated with any role in sales. So I think there's just like certain things that we have to do now, and then looking forward post-COVID, what's going to be the new normal, and what do we ultimately settle into? Just decisions we have to make.
Interesting. I know that some of the largest, for instance, SDR teams here in the Bay Area, at least, right? Some of the big names, which you all know, are at least going hybrid, right? 2 to 3 days in the office, ensuring that young sales talent is getting the attention they need, right? As Matt mentioned, I mean, I've ran teams, both sales development and sales teams. There's no substitute for having those folks side by side. There really isn't. But there's a lot of different strategies we can do if you're remote, right? Curious, where is your SDR team? Is that up in the Pacific Northwest?
Seattle. Yep.
Seattle? Nice. Okay.
And we're hiring.
Virtual folks, you know how to get a job, and they're hiring. So good to go.
Sunny Seattle.
Sunny Seattle. Very nice. All right. So kind of the flip side of that is we were talking on our prep call about how buyers and prospects are buying differently now, right? Whether it's referral based or talking to other customers. And it's made sales development even that much harder, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're not taking calls anymore. If we can get a hold of them and they haven't heard of us, they don't want to talk to us quite yet, right? So I'm curious, what strategies, we talked about a few prior, but what strategies have you guys implemented to accommodate for the SDR team or to train them up on how buyers have changed their process internally?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so hard to argue with that. Obviously, buyers are well more educated these days. They're going farther in the process of self-education before they buy from you, and you have to facilitate that process. And again, we're back to content. So you have to have that valuable content which they read, and it's not directly pushy messaging from you, but they get some value out of it. Again, it's communities and those, like organizations they're, part of, and through those events and communities, they know your name, they know your brand. So we're trying to represent our brand in here. And then it's also motion of sales. Somebody smart told me that in enterprise sales, where our company is, today it's the motto should be, how do you prove to the buyer that by choosing you, he's making a right decision? Not convincing the buyer, not like pushing the buyer. Again, I'll kind of repeat that. Help to buyer to prove to himself and within the org that he's making right decision by choosing you. And it's a very simple phrase, but it's such a hard thing to accomplish and kind of get to that level. So we are trying to understand what makes our ICPs champions within their orgs. Literally, like not only ROI for their organization, but trying to understand what makes them a champions, how we can help them with reporting, showing that ROI they're bringing back to the company. And then we're trying to knock their door and tell them, like, look, we think we can help you with better representation of your work, of your influence within your organization. And here's how: content-based, value prop-based. So I think we pay a lot of attention to this. And it's kind of hard to convince somebody to buy your product if they don't know you. But if they're coming already prepped, it's much better. Mm-hmm. Interesting, want to relate to that conversation. I was just yesterday on our sales sync up internally, and there was interesting topic popped up again and again, like what deals are better for us, inbound or outbound. I was like sitting and listening to that, and my response would be both. But it was interesting to kind of hear what they were discussing. And somebody brought in that topic that outbound, when they bite, way more fruitful, because if you have inbound lead, yes, there is buyer intent, but it's also a lot of vendor competition going on, and all of the vendors are trying to do the demos. It's a feature battle. Buyers are already not clear what features were presented by what vendor, and then it's a pricing game, and they just don't like to be in that situation. But when it's fruitful and right outbound, and you are pretty much unique or yourself in front of a customer explaining the value, then you can educate it better and make that last step towards the decision of buying. So, and I hear that, but to be able to generate those fruitful outbound leads, you really need to, again, content, be in the right time in the right place, and help those ICPs to bring the ROI to the company, or at least be able to represent that, hey, we are bringing that ROI, because it's challenged by itself.
Yeah, I think number one, if you've ever had a problem and you go to solve it, you just don't start like reaching out to vendors anymore. Like that's so 1980s. And like we're all part of really productive communities today. Tenbound's an amazing community. If you're a leader, you're probably an MSP. But there's just phenomenal communities when like you're sales loft or outreach, and then you go out and the world yells back and gives you feedback, like in terms of what you're looking to do. Or my friends at Outplay now, but I love everybody. But the point is, like, you go to trusted peers first today. Like, you go out to your communities, and I think so. Number one, being involved in communities and giving to communities. So on Sales Hacker, we for a whole quarter just published insights of what's working, top email templates, and correlation between subject line length and open rate. So we just kept publishing just free insights to the community. In return, they came to us asking for more. So it was really, leading with value, and also then having a strategy, a content strategy behind that. Like what would be logically next? So if they're curious with this, like what else can we continue to feed them through blogs, reports, surveys, and we've got a few more things up our sleeve for the fourth quarter. But really leading with value first, not trying to sell anything, but insert yourself into the conversation, and ultimately inserting yourself into the available solution set.
Very nice. All right. So last kind of tee up. After everything we've gone through today, the lead IQ, stats around SDR teams, and how buyers are buying. What do you foresee in the next year? Right. What are your predictions for the sales development realm in the next 12 months? How's it going to change? Any major earth-shattering pieces in the next 12 months?
Wow, that's an interesting question. I wish I would know exact answer. I'd be a billionaire in the end of that year. I think it's going to be tougher and tougher in terms of how you differentiate yourself in this, back to my definition, frogs croaking orchestra. Yeah. So they hear you, not everybody else in the market.
Yep.
So right personalization of a message, and pushing them towards, like, the first touch with your prospect should be when they know about you pretty much everything they should know about you. And then you just help them on that last mile. Mastering that ability within the SDR team, to me, that's the most important for next 12, 24 months, because that's how you differentiate your SDR team versus the competitors in the market.
Okay, so hyper-personalization as well as strong content strategy to ensure prospects are educated on not only your industry and the product realm that you're in, but also you specifically, your company specifically.
Absolutely.
All right. Matt?
I think there's a couple forces at work as we go into next year. I think like one force, like SDRs right now are really trying to figure out like what's the next move. I was actually talking to a global SDR leader last night preparing for this. And while they're not doing this, they're saying like instead of cold calls, like cold FaceTime is showing up. And like whether or not, I shake my head too.
Don't do that. Please don't do that. Don't do that.
But people are searching, right? There's like this, like what's going to work? What can I count on? Like what's going to break through and be different? And where do we continue to draw the line of like invasive? There was a time where we wouldn't text, then like AEs would be in a texting relationship, deeper cycle, and now we start to see the SDR motion. So like we continue to draw the line of what's acceptable and what we consider invasive. So I think like we're continue to test that as we go into next year. I think the other thing is, and we saw a lot of this today, so I'm not going to be overly repetitive, but what we're starting to see is the advancement of technology that's going to provide deeper insight and deeper next best action. So we're going to be able to be more effective because the AI is going to be able to, based on the persona, the right messaging sequence, the right messaging, the right thing. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to get more assistance through the technology, and we're going to continue to experiment with different messaging channels, just because what may be tired now, number one, will come back into vogue at some point, but we'll continue to test what's acceptable.
Nice. Completely roger that. And there's also like something like you don't know what you don't know. And sometimes if you look back at your activities and you look back at your pipeline and how that pipeline was actually fed by the leads, if you apply AI on top of that, you may get some ideas which you would never even think of. Right. But technology can hint you with that. So roger that for sure. I would add that that point to my list for sure.
Yeah, I would say one thing that I am seeing already working with many different companies today at Tenbound is that we're going to have a much more diverse sales development personnel overall. I mean, sales development is now the entry-level position to any company, right? It's not just sales anymore, whether it's CS, marketing, RevOps, MarOps, whatever it may be, right? Whether it's, kind of more math and science-based folks, whether it's women, which is fantastic, getting in, right? It's exciting to see and having companies hire for those specific positions beyond sales. So we're seeing that all the time. It's been a growing trend overall the last couple of years, but I'm excited to see that continue over the next couple of years and see where we can go. So I think we have a few minutes for some questions, maybe. What we got? It's the last session of the day, folks.
Cocktails.
Come on, at least one of you has a question.
First cocktail goes to the first person who asks a question.
Yes, we got one. Yes, he wants a cocktail over here.
Cocktail wasn't why I raised my hand, but yeah, I'm curious from a Regie perspective. When you're looking at the way that different segments of the market are more sophisticated in sales development or less sophisticated, how do you see like a company like Snowflake, where I'm at, where we have a lot of content, there's a huge marketing team, there's a lot of sequences already built.
Yep.
How does the first part of the question is, how does the process of using Regie improve really good, already there content, but take it to the next level? Like, how do you see that happening? And the second question is, in companies that don't have all those resources, can you just describe how the AI helps? Because I know that's maybe a pitch for your company, but I'm actually just curious more about it.
Well, I'm going to answer in reverse order. So like the value proposition, and I'll just say for AI in general, but thank you for the Regie plug, would be like for companies that are new to sales engagement. Like they've got very different questions than a Snowflake, which is wonderfully developed. And, we've talked to Lars and team, but for companies that are brand new, they don't know, when do I call? When do I email? When do I do a social touch? And then when it comes time to, how do I write these emails and call scripts? Like they've got very fundamental needs so they can start using sales engagement in a great way. So new people in. For more sophisticated organizations, especially ones like Snowflake with a very well-developed team, the ops team with Travis, the value proposition starts to change dramatically. Like number one, testing at scale. Like really important to be testing what works. And because of the volume of business that a Snowflake is doing, it's very easy, and not to do A/B testing. We call it AZ testing, where you take radically different approaches in the marketplace. The second value proposition would be content refresh. Again, if you don't have someone dedicated, your content's going to get stale quickly. You're launching new personas, new pain points, new value props. And how are you launching new content to support your new go-to-market? I call it, connecting the voice of the business to your go-to-market motion. Like, how do you ensure that the entire organization's in line? And then third, like precision around your persona. Many of our customers do what we call 3 deep. So they'll go after the CRO, the VP, and the director. And what typically happens is those 3 positions have a very different strategic field of view. They're dealing with different problems at their seat. And, many organizations will take one sequence or cadence and just homogenize that across all 3, where we would recommend that you take a very different approach, including the touch pattern, because we would slow that down for the C-level. We would be much more aggressive as we get closer to the front line. So I think like there's a number of ways to derive value. And then the last thing I would say for any solution is some companies aren't in pain. Like Snowflake may not be in pain for what we do or anything else. So it's really important that early on, when you're out there in your SDR motion or any motion, like don't waste anyone's time, your prospect's time or your time, if there's not a need there and they're committed to solving the problem. Like move on. Like this is the number one problem that we solve, but it doesn't mean it's the problem that you have. So the first thing that we do is we would make sure that it's worth your time and our time to engage in a conversation. That was worth a drink, by the way. And if you don't want it, I do.
Anybody else? I guess. One more.
We got a winner.
Oh, across the room.
You're getting your workout in today.
I know, right? It's a good thing I did it this morning.
Hi, Michael, account executive at Pathlight. So we see the rise of content of social selling, and we see it go too far, into cold FaceTiming people. But would you recommend for an up-and-coming rep to really try to be an influencer on the social space? Because you see the numbers from the outbound prospecting and they're scary. So it just kind of breaking into the social world. Would you recommend that every rep just try to go all in on that and put out LinkedIn content every day?
For like in our business, for our company, not really, because we're an enterprise sales and LinkedIn is very busy already. So we would focus more on community-based reach out. Those smaller groups of people which are peer-to-peer type of a conversation, it just works better for us rather than another message to the society through LinkedIn.
You got to be authentic. Like, don't pump out a bunch of crap if you like. It's just not you. I think the most important thing that we can all do in our career, is represent something we actually care about. Because that way, when you're telling the story, you're passionate, you're convicted. And then, if you want to publish content or you want to share or follow, like, there's other ways that you can be socially visible without, just being a machine for the sake of being a machine.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. Producing your own content probably should focus on learning your own product and how to outreach first. Like Matt said, there's other ways to engage with folks on LinkedIn, but actually posting and trying to produce your own content as a young salesperson, you're kind of fighting a losing battle for the most part.